A crucial part that the violin becomes 400 years old is also its lining. The lining is on the ribs inside. You have the ribs and then you have these two thin stripes. Now here we have two ribs. Here they are dark and here they are light. When they're light, they're the same material than the upper and the lower block and the corner blocks. These here are all spruce, just like Stradivari used. And this one, it's spruce, the blocks, the 6 blocks. And this here is willow, Italian willow. And today we talk if it's better willow or spruce. Hello, back again. This is Edgar from Cremona, Italy. And we are doing also linings. No, years ago. We always have to go back when Edgar came to Cremona, 40 something years, 42 years ago. And everybody used spruce. Spruce was the wood for the linings, the blocks, everything. At that time, you could still feel, in those years when I came here, that a lot of violin making secret was still lost. And because of so many violin makers here in town and everybody's researching, trying, figuring out and heard and what and tried and learned in Berlin, in Germany and in New York and and then this one and then he found a book and whatever. And so slowly this has been grown and rebuilt in the past 40 years to come to the point that nowadays Cremona is top of the top of violin making, and there is little out of Cremona which can compete with so many people working on the same thing in a certain level, because this is not an industry. We're working by hand and we make great sounding instruments. I make great sounding instruments, but everybody makes great sounding instrument because otherwise they cannot survive. It's just the biology of economic here in Cremona, and this makes the whole thing sparkling and good for everyone, especially for you who is looking for a violin. So when I came here, only spruce has been used, and then already in those years, in the 80s, they started to use willow. Willow because there were a few violin makers who used willow to bend these linings. The linings themselves, what do? The ribs, to bend them, are very thin. This is like 1 millimeter, so the surface would be very little to glue on a top and a back. And if violins wouldn't have the linings, they couldn't make like 300-400 years without all the time being open and then make a strange noise. It would be rather a percussion instrument than a nice sounding violin, yeah? Storioni, for instance, was one of the first makers who is famous who used willow. Probably on the way to Sesto here in Cremona, along the roads there were willow growing, and he took this willow and used it, and it's very nice to work. It's easy to bend and it's very homogeneous like a material. Spruce is splitting and is, it's not the same. This one is just like a dough and you can just work it nice and you can finish it beautiful. It looks nice, and a lot of furniture is also made with willow. This here as well, it's close to willow, this whole furniture, but it's poplar, but it's very similar. The type of wood is very similar, willow and poplar. Poplar is a little bit harder and willow is more soft and is more darker. So there are a few makers who used willow, and in the 80s they started here in Cremona to work with this wood. There were some younger violin makers, groups of violin makers. Pizzarini was one of those, Nadia Mantovani, Riccardo Bergonzi, Primo Pistoni, like a generation or two over above me, and they used a lot of this willow. At that time it was very much like trend to use willow. You would say, okay, so then everybody used willow. Over the years, I always used on Storioni. I have a Storioni model, which sounds also very good, very powerful E string and a no limit E string. It's just a great sounding instrument. And I used always willow on that one. I just had the impression that why should I change the wood on a Stradivari to willow when Stradivari used spruce? And over the years then, reading also the Violinmaking Society of America, America, these papers, the Strat and all this, I figured out that one of my masters in Ann Arbor, I worked there with Greg Alf and Joe Curtin in the 90s. Joe Curtin won a scholarship or for something in America, and there was $1 million US dollars he got because he figured out that the violin, the lighter it is, the better it sounds. And it's interesting. And then he talked about his linings, which he just uses spruce because it's lighter, and the blocks. He even made some samples where he put it on the blocks instead of spruce, even balsa, a very soft wood, just to test it out. I did my samples as well. Balsa is definitely too soft and you could just like open up. So it's rather better to carve away all the material you don't need as much as possible, that you don't make the blocks too big. And on the other side, they have to keep the whole instrument as well together, right? So for that reason, I returned, at least on Stradivarius, that I use spruce. So I would not say now that it is definitely a spruce is better sounding before saying something like this, because by what I tell, it could be that some people now say, so I want the linings out of spruce. It's lighter, yes, so it could, because of Joe Curtin, who won this prize for this kind of research in violin acoustics. But I could not now say that if you have spruce linings or willow, it sounds like this or like that. Yeah, it's just two different types. The main thing is that it raises the surface here along the ribs because the maple itself is too thin. And when we make the certificates, even we look into the FOs, we look at the linings, and we specify in every certificate, we indicate what wood is the linings. Yeah, as a musician, you don't even pay attention to the linings, and it's not so important. For a violin maker and for a certificate, it's definitely something which afterwards you cannot change, and you look inside and it is what it is, but it needs to be there, otherwise it could not keep the parts tight and steady together in order that it sounds great. Some people finish them even with sandpaper, with files and all this. I love, just on my violins, I just take a knife, I first glue them in so they're well glued, and then I just cut with a knife a triangle, so it's about 6 millimeters, 8 millimeters high and 2 millimeters thick, and then I cut all the excess material. I cut away with a knife and I just leave it with a knife, and that's it. So when you look at it, you see the cuts of Edgar's hand, and that's it. It is how it is. I think this is everything about the linings, but at least now you can look, next time you look at some instruments, something more, you can look inside the F-hole with a mirror, with a cell phone, you can make the light, and you can watch and see what kind of wood it is. Leave me a comment down below. What is your linings? What wood is it? How does it look like? Do you see the grain, spruce, or you don't? It's rather dark, or sometimes it's a little lighter, but it's just like a very homogeneous material. Let me know. Thanks. And if you don't let it know, be sure that you're subscribed. This is the word. Ciao, ciao. Bye, bye. Tell your friends. Ciao, ciao. See you next time.